back with another video, and I wanted to talk about how to recognize the difference between the demonstrative and the leading function in socionics. And just a little disclaimer, I'm a little tired from work, so go block, would go block, which is both your leading and your creative functions working together. And so the leading function is your primary um, expression of your personality. Like when people think of you, they are often thinking of your leading element and function. So if you are a lead extroverted thinking type, people will talk about you and say things like they're knowledgeable, they're practical, they're efficient, they are resourceful, right? Oftentimes that happens. And your leading function is four-dimensional, which means if so, I kind of forget all of the different parts of dimensionality. I know one dimension is personal experience. So you're only good at metabolizing that information based upon how you've experienced it subjectively, which is a very localized context of that information element. Let's say if you're an SE lead, that could be a martial art, or let's say it's a SE polar. You know how to fight. You've learned a martial art, and you know some aspect of combat and of willful object to object encounters. I will push on you and I will compete against you and I will win out over you. You might be good at fighting and have good extroverted sensation in that local domain, but the more that we extrapolate from that domain and you're placed in different contexts that equally require the presence of extroverted sensation, you may not know how to metabolize it in that situation versus the one that's more native to you. Whereas four-dimensional, having four dimensions applied to a information element means that basically, regardless if it's your personal experience with that information or if you were in a different time, a different place in the world, you would always be able to recognize that information. It's basically the water you swim in. And so you can recognize it at any time, any point, any place, any circumstance, and be able to effectively understand that information and to use and leverage that information. And so with the leading function, at one end, you recognize that the world does not, is not meeting the proper needs to that information. The world is relating to that information and doesn't care about it, isn't implementing it, is missing it. And so what you offer to the world is supplying the world or your environment with a healthy dose of that information. So if you're an introverted sensation lead, you will recognize how there's so much discomfort and discord and unharmoniousness around you, whether that's looking at someone you care about and recognizing that they're physically uncomfortable, they had a long day at work, and they don't know how to get to a state of homeostasis and peace. And so you can see that and you can recognize it. And so what an SI lead type would likely do is to supply the person with SI information, would introduce things around them that help the person reach a place of harmony, because that person, the other person, can't create it within themselves, basically. And so you see that there's a lack, and you're glad egoically to fill that need. It's where you feel relevant and needed and useful in society. Oftentimes, you can be frustrated with people if they disrespect this information by ignoring it, or basically treating it as if it's meaningless, right? So if you're an any lead and you have an any polar talking about the uselessness of thinking outside the box for its own sake and coming up with different alternative ways of seeing what could happen or play out in a situation, you would get pretty frustrated, right? Because that is your lead element, and someone else who has it in their polar function as their polar function, not only is it one dimensional, but they don't value it. So they see it as minuscule, meaningless information. It's pointless. Why care about what's possible if I can care about what is in front of me? That's what's more interesting to me. In the same way, and that's kind of a dynamic between uh, the creative and the polar. Again, I don't know if this is systemically correct or theoretically correct, but it makes sense to me. I don't want to do NE if I'm an ESI. That's not the kind of PE or, um, yes, basically PE, extroverted perception element. That's not the kind that I want to do. And so I would rather perceive what is rather than what could be, which that just makes a lot of sense. And so in the same way, like maybe an SLE is not trying to evaluate people based upon whether or not they have moral integrity, or they're kind of a, if they like them or not, or are they a person that I would want to get to know or not, or what qualifies as someone that could be a friend to them. They would rather look at relationships in a more technical and rule bound sense. That if you're um, if you have something that you believe in, and we share that belief in some fashion, then sure, we can be in the same party, no problem. But I'm not looking at each individual person within the group as um, and having a personal relationship with each one of those individuals, but rather we're all in the same group because we all believe the same things, and therefore by default they're my friend. It's not individualistic, right? So the leading function, going back to what I was previously saying, the leading function is trying to fulfill a need that other people either disrespect in society or in their immediate environment, or they're just not integrating that information. They're seeing all the things that they could do in a certain situation, and but they're not giving um, the lead function elements perspective. They're not thinking about, well, yes, um, bro, I hate traffic. For example, let's say you have an EII and an SLE, and EII being like, well, you know, we could think about this in a different way. Maybe something happened in their life or whatever the case is, and we just, in order to solve this problem, we need more perspective. Maybe if we build some kind of closeness and nearness with this person and see if there's something in them that can be developed, then we will sign this peace treaty and whatever the case is, right? Whereas an SLE is like, uh, I, or we could tell them what they're going to do and they're gonna do it. Like, we could conflict with them and impose ourselves and let them know we're not standing for this act, whatever the case is. It's a waste of time to think about alternatives when time is money and we got to get down to business, right? That's like the SLE mentality, whatever. You kind of get the idea. The SLE is not caring about the NF aspect of, a difficult relational situation. They're saying what you're really missing in your evaluation of this is you're never including force. Have you confronted the person? Have you told them what you want? Have you pushed back on them? And obviously, the EII would not recognize that information because it's polar. So they're like, why would I do that? That's dirty. I wouldn't do that. And so the point being is that when you recognize that your lead element and lead function directing that element, when it's not represented, it kind of miffs you. You're kind of like, hello, yes, we could do this, that, and the third, or we could do this thing. Have you ever thought of this? And depending on the intertype relations with whomever's in the environment listening to what you're saying, they could be like, yeah, we heard you. We don't care. we, we don't want what you're selling, brother. We're not interested. And then that irritates you, right? Because your lead function and the element placed within it um, is extremely important to you. It's inert, it's stubborn. And so you're going to double down and say, no, we really need to consider, we really need to think this through, because have you ever thought about the fact that this is just practically not going to work? If it's a TE lead, they're like, yes, you could force something to happen, Mr. SLE or SEE, whatever the case is, or that could be a practical nightmare. What about all the resources you're wasting in the process? Um, that's not a very economical decision. And so the TE lead would step in and offer an economic perspective, a pragmatic perspective, one that would either be a long-term application of, you know, effective ways of going about a certain task at work or a solution to a problem, and or it could be more of a TESE or TESI thing where it's about the practicality of a physical system and the way that it's operating and how smooth it is and so on and so forth. So your lead function is uh, stubborn, it is strong, it's valued, and so it's bold. And so you're really pushing this out for people to respect, people to listen to, people to integrate and to um, make use of. Dang, I should have turned right there. Yeah, I know this guy behind me is like, you did. Look at this idiot. Yeah, you're stupid, dude. Like, went through a red light and then it's my fault. That's hilarious. People watching are like, you just almost got in an accident. Yeah, not really, but um. So yeah, you. I might get some text after this. Like, get off your phone. I really should get another holder that I used to have. That used to be fire. I could just put my phone up there, not have to hold it, not have to worry about it. But so you're really wanting people to get this information, and um, you're not gonna stop until they listen. You're like, right? So that's basically the lead. I mean, I could probably keep going on that, but I don't want this to be forever. So the demonstrative is flexible. It is, and these aren't all the dichotomies of the functions. I'm just giving you kind of some bite-sized aspects of the functions, whatever. The demonstrative is strong, unvalued, flexible. Um, I don't know if it's situational. I think it's been a little bit since I've looked into it, sociotics chart. But so in like practically, how does the demonstrative work, and what does it look like? It looks like I can do everything that this person that has that lead element does without caring about it. I don't. It's not egoic. It's kind of private. You're kind of you're always metabolizing this information, and you're kind of passively seeking it. And I don't mean in a sociotic seeking way, but I mean you are getting a healthy dose in volume of this information and quality because it's strong. So you wouldn't, if it's strong, you're not taking in bad forms of that information. Like if it's four dimensional, you would expect, let's say, for um, a FE type, um, you wouldn't. Why am I? What's? Oh yeah. Um, you wouldn't be bad at creating moods and sustaining them. Like if the situation, especially because Effie's dynamic, right? So if emotions go left in an interaction with someone, it's not like you can't redirect it emotionally. Like you can't make a joke here, you can't get someone fired up to get them mad about something, so they go do this thing, a task or something challenging. It's not like you can't do that. It's not like you'd really fumble a lot with that either. Like you're trying to create some type of emotional effect in the environment, it just is not hitting. Like that's not usually what happens with a demonstrative. You're not really creating a lot of social faux pas, if that's the right word to use, like social blunders, because it's four dimensional. So if it's strong, then theoretically you're more often than not pretty good at recognizing this information and contributing to it, um, insightfully and whatever effectively whenever it shows up. So for see, I'm throwing all different types in the gauntlet just to kind of drive the point home. But like if things get dicey and contentious, and LSC is not like, oh man, I don't know how to dig deep and go at it with someone else or to impose myself in certain situations when necessary. Like an LSC, and when necessary is the key. They can do that. Of course they can. Why would they not be able to? They're four dimensional in an extroverted sensation. So they might do things like, um, you know, combat sports, or, you know, um, they like to play football, like to do martial arts, like things that challenge them physically. So they know and they appreciate challenges as a recreational thing. It's not their ego. They're not pushing out, you must fight to survive, like an SLE would. Because to them, that's not the true expression of extroverted sensation, right? Once we get relative to different all the different types and how they perceive that information, it doesn't necessarily distort the essence of what that information is. So for example, an LSC doesn't, just because they have a different relationship to SE, doesn't redefine what SE is. That's just when you apply it to the function, and the function basically determines how that person sees and utilizes that information. So an LSC would they would think naturally, if I have to force something, that means that the system is defective. Like theoretically, If I made everything flow the way that it should, I really shouldn't have to impose myself in here. I really shouldn't have to do that because I've constantly updated the system, made tweaks to the system, and I've experimented with it and permutated with it and manipulated it. And if I need to step in and physically pick something up and place it in a different spot, then I'll do so. Um, and they just don't. They just have no problem adapting. They're adaptable types. They're a dynamic type. Yeah, they have TE lead and NE mobilizing. So there's this kind of flexible, tactical, um, you know, uh, kind of constantly updating uh, the iOS, so to speak. It's like, hey, we're always making improvements. That's the kind of Delta ST mentality, right? So your demonstrative, when people have an egoic, and I mean this in the socionic sense, attachment to this, you kind of feel like it's overkill. It's kind of like, let's say for an ESI and an SEI that are quasi identicals. If an SEI is always trying to create harmony, firstly within themselves and in an extended fashion to their surroundings, because those are kind of coupled together. Because if your environment's chaotic, obviously it's going to cause discomfort to yourself, and vice versa. But an ESI, let's say that there is some relational struggle going on between, the SEI, the ESI, and some person they know, whatever. The SEI is going to try to um, why do why do people have to play music at 4,000 volume and bad music? It's like not even good music. Um, but the SEI is obviously trying to keep the mood light and try to get to understand where a person's coming from and just make the person feel good. Like, hey, very soft spoken. That's kind of the caricature of SEI. It's usually true. The ESI would be like, yeah, that SI stuff's all cool. However, uh, there's a real problem here. And you're going to see their SE because they value it. They're like, no, you just need to tell that person off. SE like, okay, that's not necessary. Like, it's just chill out, right? Um, and so an ESI would see an SEI's use of SI at times to be not necessary. It's kind of like, hey, yeah, I get the whole here. Is that a cop? I can't tell. I just gotta make sure you don't see my phone, baby. Yeah. Um. Yeah, peace is all cool and all. But this is a pretty dicey situation, and you just need to confront the problem instead of trying to smooth it over. And so that's kind of what you see with the dynamic between the demonstrative and the lead. It just the demonstrative is just chilling in the background, always kind of metabolizing and remetabolizing information, and then kind of sending it back into the ego block. It's just kind of a natural passive chain of information that's being uh, almost like spreading a spreading some disease, or like, that makes no sense, but you kind of get my idea that it's it's always active in the function of metabolizing data or information, and how it relates to the lead in the creative is passive, in the sense that it's kind of detached, and by overflow of all that information, it just naturally flows into your ego block, and it's just kind of being filled in there, where your ego is like, okay, how do we incorporate all of this excess data that we know we can use in order to project and push out what we actually care about? That's like the best way I could describe it. um, your ego kind of takes control over it, in the sense that, especially your leading, because um, it's inert. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're only going to research, let's say for an ILE, right? We're only going to really um, do a lot of research on many different topics insofar as there's potential in that information. Can I extrapolate from that data into new territories and new ideas and new horizons, ideologically and mentally? If I can't, I don't care about that information, basically. Um, so I would say that your lead is double active, in the sense that it's active in its constant metabolization of information, and it's active in regards to how it relates to all the other elements. It's creating demands on all the other elements. Whereas your demonstrative is active passive. It's active in the sense that it's strong and it's always metabolizing information, but it's passive in some sense to the rest of all your information elements and all your functions. It's not trying to necessarily create dictates to all the other functions in your psyche. Um, that's not to say that it doesn't have dyna- doesn't it doesn't have other dynamics to other functions, but primarily it's still passive. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of how I've been thinking about the demonstrative for a while. That it's kind of detached in some interesting way. It's kind of a weird phenomena. You have something that is so strong, and it's so active in the person. You can see it constantly, but they don't really care about it. And you could probably see this in real people. Like, there's some aspect of them that they do something very well, and this is just a generalization. And but they treat it with kind of like, yeah, but so what? You're like, have you ever thought about doing this every day or for a career? They're like, nah. You're like, why? Like, yeah, I don't want to. So that's just bite-sized information of the difference from the lead and the demonstrative. So that's all I have. Peace.